The champagne in seat 2A had been poured when Sam Kessler reached the cabin, boarding pass in hand. Roland Ackerman didn't look up. He flicked 2 fingers toward the aisle, the way a man waves off a waiter. "Find somewhere else, friend." The purser, Denise Farrow, hovered and said nothing. Sam's hand closed around the strap of his bag. He didn't argue. 4 rows back, a woman in a gray coat set down her phone, stood, and spoke 6 words into it. 5 minutes later, security walked Roland, his wife, and his assistant off the aircraft. The cabin went still. The jet bridge door opened again a moment later, and a 9-year-old girl came through it holding a paper cup of orange juice with both hands. Josie Kessler found her father in the 2nd row and slid into the window seat beside him, as if nothing in the world had happened, because, as far as she knew, nothing had. Sam took a napkin from the seat pocket and wiped a ring of condensation off the armrest before she could set her cup down. He pulled the belt across her lap and checked the buckle twice, the way he checked everything twice. "Is this Grandma's window?" Josie asked, pressing her forehead to the glass. "Same window," Sam said. "She used to sit right here and count the trucks on the ground until we took off." "How many were there?" "Depends on the day. Some days a lot. Some days you just have to wait for them." Josie opened her tray table, closed it, opened it again, the way children test that a thing still works. "Did Grandma ever fly when it was raining?" "Every kind of day," Sam said. "She used to say the rain made the runway shine like a river." "Will it shine today?" "We'll see when we get up there." He said it the way he said most things to his daughter, softly, with a patience that seemed to cost him nothing, and a passenger 2 rows back, who had every reason to be angry at the airline, found herself watching a father instead, and, forgetting, for a moment, to be. The woman in the gray coat came up the aisle. Up close, she was younger than the coat suggested, maybe 37, with the kind of stillness that came from being watched a great deal. She crouched slightly so she was level with Sam rather than standing over him. "Mr. Kessler, I'm sorry for what happened. I'd like a short statement before we push back, if that's all right." Sam glanced at his daughter, then back. "There's nothing to write down." "A man wanted a seat. He's gone now. We're fine. He put his hands on your bag. He didn't hurt anything." Sam's voice stayed level. "We've got family waiting on the other end. I'd rather just fly." The woman studied him a second longer than a form required. "Aaron Delaney," she said, and left it there, as if the name were a door she wasn't sure she wanted to open. Farther up the cabin, Denise Farrow was refolding a blanket that did not need refolding. She had worked this route 11 years. She had deferred to the man in 2A, without once asking who the man in the aisle was, and the shame of that small failure sat on her now like a stone in a coat pocket. Down on the tarmac, through the oval window, Roland Ackerman had stopped walking. He turned back toward the aircraft, phone already at his ear. Whatever he said it looking straight up at the fuselage, and a man does not stare at metal that way unless he is talking about the people inside it. "There will be consequences for this," he told the person on the line. "Considerable ones." Josie counted trucks. Sam watched his daughter count. And Aaron Delaney, walking back to her seat, found herself unable to answer the 2 questions that had lodged in her since the aisle. Why she, of all people, had stood up for a stranger's seat, and why a man treated like that had asked for nothing at all. The flight landed in Denver a little after 4. Erin did not go home. She went to the operations floor, badged into a terminal in the corner, and pulled up the manifest to close out the incident report the way procedure required. Passenger, seat, complaint, resolution, routine. She found the row for 2A and stopped. The seat was not an ordinary assignment. Beside the number sat a flag she had seen only in training documents. Never live, founder VIP, permanent hold. And beneath it, the name to whom the seat belonged, the name the system would never reassign, the name Roland Ackerman had dropped himself into as if it were nothing, as is out. Kessler. Erin sat back. She had been chief executive of Meridian Air for 4 months. She had read the founding documents her first week, the way a new pilot reads the emergency cards, and she knew there were 2 signatures on the incorporation papers. One belonged to a man on the board. The other belonged to a name she had assumed was long gone from the company, retired or dead or bought out. He had been in seat 2A the whole time. He had thanked no one, claimed nothing, asked only to fly. The man she had stood up to protect, a stranger in a worn jacket wiping a ring off an armrest for his daughter, had built the airline she now ran. On the operations floor, the story moved faster than the report. A gate agent who had been aboard mentioned the flag to a colleague. The colleague mentioned it to Denise, who was clocking out. Denise stood at her locker with her coat half on and felt the stone in her pocket turn to lead. She had refolded a blanket for a man who owned the blanket, the seat, and the walls around them, and she had let another man wave him into the aisle. Word like that does not stay in one building. By evening, a maintenance lead named Carl had heard it, and the overnight shift heard it from Carl, and every one of them thought of the quiet technician who had trained half the floor and never once said where he'd learned it. Josie did not hear any of that. What she saw, at the baggage carousel, was her father lifting their single suitcase with one hand, and 2 mechanics she didn't know nodding at him the way people nod at someone they respect. She stood a little straighter for the rest of the night without being able to say why. In the crew room, Denise Farrow pulled up the incident form she'd started and never finished. Under the line for the passenger removed, she had typed Roland Ackerman's name in full with his title. Under the line for the passenger wronged, she had typed only the word technician. She looked at the 2 lines a long time. Then she deleted technician and left the field empty, because she no longer knew a word that fit a man who owned the seat he'd been asked to leave. Erin closed the report without submitting it. Procedure said, resolved. She typed nothing in the box, marked resolution, because nothing about it was. She wrote 1 line in her own notebook instead, the paper one she kept for the questions that didn't have fields. Why is a founder working a technician's shift? Then she pulled Sam Kessler's employee file, saw the job title, saw the pay grade, saw the date he had stepped down 3 years earlier with no reason recorded, and knew she was going to drive out to the maintenance base in the morning, whether or not she had a reason to. The Meridian maintenance base sat on the far north edge of the field, past the cargo ramps, in a hangar that smelled of jet fuel and cold metal. Erin found Sam under the belly of a regional jet at 7 in the morning, one arm up inside an access panel, a flashlight clamped between his teeth. He didn't stop working when he saw her shoes. "You don't have an appointment," he said around the flashlight. "I own the calendar." He set the light down, wiped his hands on a rag that made them no cleaner, and looked at her the way a man looks at weather he can't change. "You came to close the report. The report's closed." "Not true, exactly, but close enough." "I came because you didn't want it open." Sam picked the flashlight back up. "There's nothing to want." A man was rude. "It happens more than you'd think, in this coat. Your name is on the building's incorporation, Mr. Kessler." His hands paused, one beat, then kept moving. "Lots of names are on old paper. Doesn't feed a kid or fix an aileron." Erin watched him work. She had come prepared for a grievance, a demand, the leverage a wronged founder would be entitled to pull. What she got was a man reseating a bracket and refusing to look at her longer than the job required. "You could have said something on that plane. Most people in your position would have a lawyer on the phone." "Most people in my position," Sam repeated, and something moved behind his face and was gone. "You don't know my position. Then tell me." "I fix airplanes. That's the position." He stepped back and faced her, and his voice came quiet and final. "You did a kind thing yesterday. I'm grateful. That's where it ends. Whatever's on that old paper, leave it there. It's better for you if you do." It was not a threat. It was closer to a warning given for her sake than his, and that unsettled her more than any demand would have. Across town, in a glass office 30 floors above the river, Roland Ackerman was doing what a man with real power does when a small thing goes wrong, making it a large thing about someone else. He had spent the morning on the phone with 2 board members he'd seated himself. A disruptive employee, a publicity risk, a founder past his time, bitter, using a comped seat to stage a scene. The new chief executive is protecting him, Roland said, in the reasonable tone he used when he was most dangerous. She's 4 months in and already picking the wrong side. What he did not say was that he'd recognized the name Kessler on the manifest and taken the seat anyway, the way a man leans his weight on an old fence to see if it still stands. He had not expected it to hold. By noon, a version of the story in which Sam was the villain and Aaron the fool had begun to circulate among the people who decided both their futures. Aaron heard the first echo that afternoon, from a director who smiled while he warned her. She shut her office door and understood she had a choice to make about a man who had asked her, plainly, to make none. She had never been able to leave a question alone. It was the trait that had made her, and the one the board would learn to fear. The choice made itself 3 days later, on a Tuesday, when a Meridian aircraft outbound for Salt Lake City turned back over the mountains with a fault nobody on the ground could name. The flight landed safely. That was never in question. But the monitoring system had thrown a warning. The manufacturer's own engineers, on a conference line, could not explain, and until someone did, the airplane was grounded, and the 2 behind it were grounding too, and a grounded fleet was money bleeding by the minute. Aaron was in the operations center at 11 at night when someone said the maintenance lead wanted a technician pulled in. She heard the name before she saw him. Sam came in, still in his jacket, took one look at the scrolling fault log on the big screen, and asked for it to stop. There, go back 4 lines. The room went quiet the way rooms do when a person speaks with the authority of knowing. It's not the sensor, Sam said. The sensor's fine. It's the order the system reads them in. There's a timing gap between 2 channels, a few milliseconds, and the logic reads the gap as a failure that isn't there. It's not dangerous, it's a ghost. But it'll keep grounding airplanes until you fix how it listens, not what it hears. One of the manufacturer's engineers asked how he could know that from a log. Because I wrote the first version of that logic, Sam said, and then, as if he'd said too much, a long time ago. He walked them through the fix in under 20 minutes. The fleet was flying by dawn. A younger engineer asked him, half joking, why a man who could do that was signing off work orders on the graveyard shift. Sam clicked his pen closed. Because the airplanes don't care what your title is, he said. They only care whether somebody's paying attention. No one in the room laughed, because it had the weight of a thing learned the hard way. When it was over, the room emptied. Sam lingered to sign off the paperwork, and for a moment it was just the 2 of them and the low hum of the machines. Thank you, Aaron said. It's the job. It's more than the job, and we both know it. He didn't answer. He capped his pen, and the silence between them held a shape it hadn't held before, less like a wall and more like a held breath. It was then that Ted Brennan appeared in the doorway. Ted was one of the oldest captains still on the line, gray at the temples, careful the way men become careful when they have a pension and a mortgage and a memory they'd rather not carry. He had flown Meridian's first revenue flight. He looked at Sam a long moment, then at Aaron, and something crossed his face he clearly wished had stayed hidden. Good to see you on the floor, Sam, he said. And then, lower, almost to himself, there's a lot about this place that never made it into the records. Some of it should have. He left before Aaron could ask what he meant, but the sentence stayed after him, and she carried it home, turning it over, wondering what a careful man knew that he was too careful to say. She found part of the answer where she least expected it, on a Saturday, in the atrium of the terminal. Aaron had come in on a day off to sign something that couldn't wait, and she was crossing the wide marble floor when a small voice called out, "That's the airplane lady." Josie Kessler stood at the big glass model of a Meridian jet the airline kept on display for children, the one with a button that lowered the landing gear. Sam stood a few feet back, 2 coffees in a cardboard tray, off-duty, out of his work jacket, looking like any other father on a Saturday. "You know how it goes up," Josie informed Aaron. "But do you know how it stops?" "Tell me," Aaron said, and crouched to the girl's level the way she had on the plane. Josie pressed the button. The little gear came down with a whir. Wheels. And then the big flappy things on the wings. "My dad knows all of it. He knows more than the buttons. I bet he does." For a while it was just that, a girl narrating an airplane, a father half smiling behind 2 cooling coffees, a chief executive laughing at something a 9-year-old said. The tightness Aaron carried in meetings was not in her face here. Neither was the guard in Sam's. "You have to say thank you to it," Josie instructed, pressing the button again. "Dad says the airplane can tell." Sam shrugged when Aaron glanced at him. "She's not wrong," he said. "You treat the machine like it's listening. You check it like it's listening, and one day it catches something before it breaks." Aaron heard something older under the word. The kind only people who've lost something to a thing that went unchecked ever mean. When Josie wandered to the next display, Sam handed Aaron one of the coffees without being asked, as if the second cup had been for her all along. "She's something," Aaron said. "She's her mother." He said it before he could stop himself, and the half-smile went still. "Laura worked here. Engineering. Safety side." He looked at the model, at the gear his daughter had lowered. "She's the reason half those systems catch what they catch." "Was?" Sam's jaw tightened. He watched Josie press another button across the room. 3 years, he said, which was not an answer, and was the only one he gave. He did not say died. He did not say how. He set his coffee down, half finished, called Josie over, and the door that had opened an inch closed again, gently, the way he closed everything. Aaron drove home with the girl's laugh and the father's silence pressed together in her mind, and she knew, the way you know weather is turning, that the seat on the plane had never been the real story. On Monday, she did something she had no procedural reason to do. She pulled the safety records for the year Laura Kessler had worked engineering. Most of it was ordinary. But one report, filed almost 3 years earlier, the same season Sam had stepped down, carried a status she had to look up because she'd never seen a live one before. Classified. Restricted access. Sealed by board authority. Someone with the power to bury a thing had buried this one, and the only board member with that authority 3 years ago, the man who signed the sealing order, was Roland Ackerman. Aaron could not open the report. The seal was above even a chief executive. That was the point of it. But a sealed file is still a file, and files live in a building, and the building was preparing for a federal audit. The Federal Aviation Administration had scheduled a records inspection for the following month, and ahead of it, a small team in the basement of the operations building was digitizing 3 decades of quality assurance paperwork so the airline could hand the inspectors clean electronic copies. It was slow, thankless work, and it was being done by a man named Gus Latham, who had run the QA archive for 22 years and was 6 months from retiring out of it. Gus was not looking for anything. He was feeding pages into a scanner one at a time, box after box, when he reached a folder that had been sealed with a board order and, per the audit protocol, had to be logged and imaged even if it could not be read into the general system. He was supposed to scan the cover sheet and set it aside. He read it instead. 22 years earns a man that much. What he read made him sit down on an overturned crate and stay there a while. The report had been filed by S. Kessler, chief engineer, and it was a warning. It described a specific failure mode in a groundside maintenance procedure, a corner that had been cut, a redundant check that had been removed to save cost and time, and it stated, in the flat language of an engineer who is frightened and refuses to show it, that the change would eventually get someone killed. It named the procedure. It named the risk. It was dated and stamped as received, and beneath the stamp was a second document clipped to the first. A sealing order, signed by Roland Ackerman, dated 11 days later. 11 days. The warning had been read, understood, and locked away in under 2 weeks, and clipped behind the sealing order, because someone in records had been thorough, was an incident summary from 4 months after that. A maintenance bay accident. A structural failure in exactly the procedure the report had flagged. 1 fatality. The name of the fatality was Laura Kessler. Gus Latham sat in the basement with the pages in his lap and did the arithmetic no one had ever been meant to do. The man had warned them. They had sealed the warning. 4 months later, the exact thing he warned about had killed his wife, and then they had moved him out of the chair where he might keep asking questions and let the whole airline go on believing the founder had simply lost his nerve after a tragedy. Gus made 2 copies. He put one in the audit log where it legally belonged. The other he carried upstairs, in a plain folder under his arm, to the office of the only executive he'd heard was asking questions she wasn't supposed to ask. "You'll want to be sitting down for this," he told Erin, and set the folder on her desk. She read it standing up. When she finished, she understood that everything she'd believed about the quiet man in the hangar had been not just incomplete, but backward. He had not lost his nerve. He had kept it, alone, for 3 years, and asked the world for nothing, and let a man walk him into an aisle, rather than make a scene his daughter would have to witness. She did not go home that night either. Erin called Ted Brennan the next morning and asked him to meet her somewhere that wasn't the airport. They met in a diner off the interstate, the kind with vinyl booths and coffee that never stopped coming. She put the folder on the table between them, closed, and watched him look at it. "You already know what's in it," she said. Ted turned his coffee cup a slow quarter turn and didn't reach for the folder. "I know what I heard. I never saw the paper. There's a difference, and I've been hiding behind it for 3 years. You knew he was right. I knew Laura was worried. She told me, in this booth, about a month before. Said Sam had put something in writing and it had gone quiet, and quiet was worse than a fight." Ted's hand flattened on the table. "I had 2 years to my pension, a daughter in nursing school. I told myself a captain flies airplanes. He doesn't fly the boardroom. I told myself a lot of things. I need you to say it on the record. To the executive committee. What Laura told you. What you knew." Ted was quiet a long moment. Outside, a truck downshifted on the frontage road. "If I do that, Ackerman comes for everything I have." "He'll try," Erin said. "He's already coming for me, and I've had this job 4 months. The difference is he's been coming for Sam 3 years, and Sam let him, because the only thing Sam ever tried to protect was a girl who still thinks her father just fixes airplanes." She leaned in. "I'm done letting the careful people win, Ted." He looked at the folder a long time, then he pulled it toward him and opened it. When he reached the incident summary, he stopped turning the cup. "You spend a career telling people to speak up if they see something," he said. "The one time it counted, I saw something and I sat on it." He closed the folder. "Tell me where to be." That evening, Erin drove out to the maintenance base and found Sam locking up, and for the first time, she did not come as his chief executive. She came with a folder and no authority to soften what was in it. "I found your report," she said, "the one they sealed. I found what came 4 months after it. I know why you stepped down. I know it wasn't nerve." Sam went very still. The keys hung motionless from his hand. "You had no right to open that," he said. But the fight had gone out of the words before they left him. "I didn't open it. A man who's been in the archive 22 years did, because it was right and he was tired of being the kind of man who doesn't." She held the folder out. "I'm not going to bury it again, Sam, but I won't take it another step without you. It's yours. It's hers. You tell me whether we finish it." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind through the open hangar and the tick of cooling metal. Sam looked at the folder in her hand, then at her, and the guardedness she had run into every time was still there, but behind it now was something that had been waiting 3 years for someone to stand where she stood. "They'll say I did it for revenge," he said quietly. Then we make sure the paper says what it says and let them talk. He took the folder. Their hands were both on it a second longer than the handoff required, and neither let go first. "Okay," Sam said. "We finish it." They worked late that week, the two of them and Ted, and, quietly, Gus, in a conference room Aaron booked under a false meeting name so Roland's people wouldn't see it on the calendar. On the third night, when the others had gone and the building had emptied to the hum of the ventilation, Sam finally told her the rest. He told it, looking at the window, at his own reflection over the runway lights, not at her. "I gave them the report on a Thursday. I remember because Laura made a joke that I'd finally put something in writing instead of just muttering about it." His hand rested flat on the table, unmoving. 11 days later, it was sealed. I went to Ackerman. He told me I was overreacting, that the procedure had run fine for years, that I should think about the company's position before I made noise. I made noise anyway. I filed it twice more, and they moved you out. Restructuring, they called it. Eliminated the chief engineer role, split it into 3 smaller ones, none of them mine. Clean, nothing you could point to. His jaw worked once. I was still fighting it the week Laura died, in the bay, the exact way the report said someone would. He was silent a moment. His eyes stayed on the glass. When he spoke again, it was almost too quiet to hear. "I keep her badge in my toolbox. I go to work every day in the place that killed her, because if I left, there'd be no one inside who knew what to look for. Somebody had to stay and watch the thing they wouldn't fix. So I stayed. And I stopped talking. Because the one time I talked, they sealed it. And 4 months later, she was gone. And I couldn't." He stopped. His hand pressed harder against the table until the knuckles went pale, and that was the whole of it. That pressure, the only place the 3 years showed. Aaron did not reach for him. She understood, somehow, that reaching would be wrong, that the man had held himself together for 3 years precisely by not being touched. Instead, she pulled out the chair beside him and sat, close, and looked at the same window he was looking at, so that whatever he carried, he was not the only one facing it. Below, an aircraft rolled to the hold line and waited, all its lights burning, going nowhere until it was cleared, and she understood the man had been that airplane for 3 years, fueled and ready and holding because no one would give him the word. "I was going to close the report," she said, after a while, "that first day, on the plane. I almost wrote resolved and went home. I almost got it wrong, too, but you didn't. I stood up in that aisle, and I couldn't tell you why. I think I can now." They sat with that. 2 people at a dark window, a foot of empty table between them that neither moved to close. The next morning, the folder went to the executive committee under Aaron's signature. And that afternoon, Roland Ackerman, who had heard about a meeting booked under a false name, made his last move. He filed to have Aaron Delaney removed as chief executive at the same session, for cause, citing a founder she couldn't control and a company she'd turned against itself. The executive committee met on a Friday, in the long room on the 30th floor, 7 members around a table older than the airline. Roland spoke first, because men like Roland always arranged to speak first. He was good. He talked about stability, about a chief executive 4 months in her chair siding with a bitter former founder, about a company that could not afford theater. He asked them to remove Aaron Delaney before her poor judgment cost them more. Then Aaron laid the report on the table. She did not raise her voice. She walked them through it the way Sam had walked the room through the fault log, 1 line at a time, in order. The warning, the date it was received, the sealing order 11 days later, with Roland's signature on it. The incident summary 4 months after, the name of the person who died. She played the recording of Ted Brennan's statement, given on the record 2 days before. A senior captain's voice, steady, saying what Laura had told him in a diner booth and what he'd been too careful to repeat for 3 years. She entered Gus Latham's audit log, the legal copy, filed in the ordinary course of a federal inspection, impossible to call a forgery or a vendetta because it lived in the government's own paperwork now. Roland tried. He called it selective, called it grief dressed up as evidence, called Sam unstable and Aaron naive. But the paper said what it said, and the room had stopped listening to him somewhere around the 11 days. One member held the sealing order under the light, read the signature, read the date, and set it down without looking at Roland again. Through all of it, Sam stood against the back wall of the room he had been quietly pushed out of 3 years earlier. He said nothing. He didn't have to. Aaron had asked him to be there, not to speak, and being there was the whole of it, the founder, present, in his own name, while the truth he'd carried alone was read aloud by someone else. The vote to refer the matter to the Federal Aviation Administration and remove Roland Ackerman from the board was 6-1. The one was Roland. For a moment no one moved. Then Roland stood, buttoned his jacket with hands not quite steady, and walked the length of the table to the door. He passed within a few feet of Sam on his way out. He did not look at him. Sam did not look away. The doors closed behind him. The man who had waved a founder into an aisle, who had sealed a warning and let it kill the woman whose name sat beside that founder's on the first page of the company, was escorted from the building by security, the same quiet arithmetic that had opened the whole thing on a jet bridge that morning. Everyone had been removed. It had only taken 3 years to remove the right one. Erin gathered her papers. Across the room she found Sam's eyes, and neither of them smiled. Because it was not that kind of moment. It was the other kind. The kind after which nothing goes back to how it was. The naming was a small ceremony. Weeks later, the way the important things usually are. Meridian rewrote the sealed procedure and rebuilt the redundant check that had been cut. And in the maintenance manual, every technician in the fleet would carry. The safety protocol that governed that bay was given a name it had never had before. The Kessler Standard, for L. Kessler, Engineering. Sam did not take back the chief engineer's chair. The committee offered it. He turned it down. He took a senior technical role instead, hands on the airplanes, close to the work, on his own terms. He had spent 3 years staying in a place because someone had to watch it. Now he stayed because he chose to. At the ceremony, Josie sat in the front row in a dress her father had ironed badly, swinging her feet, and when the small plaque was uncovered, she read the name on it aloud, slowly, the way she read everything, and did not entirely understand it, and was proud of it anyway. Afterward, she asked Aaron whether the airplane with her mother's name on it would fly to all the cities, and Aaron told her, yes, everyone, and Josie nodded as though that were plainly the right answer and went to find the cookies. Gus Latham retired that spring, a few months early, on his own terms, and handed the archive to a younger clerk with a single instruction: read the cover sheets. Ted Brennan kept his pension, and, he would say later, something he'd come to value more than it. On a Friday evening, at the end of it, the 3 of them stood at the wide window on the observation level, the one that looked down the length of the runway. Josie stood between them, a paper cup in both hands, counting the aircraft as they lined up for departure the way her mother had once counted trucks. 9, she reported. No. 10. There's another one. 10, Sam agreed. The sun was going down at the far end of the field, and a Meridian jet turned onto the runway and began to roll, gathering itself, and lifted off into the orange, and Josie made a small sound of satisfaction and reached up without looking and took a hand on each side of her. Her father's on one, and on the other, without deciding to, Aaron's. Neither adult said anything. Neither moved their hand. There had been a version of this evening where Aaron signed her document and drove home, and a version where Sam packed up his toolbox and walked out to the parking lot the way he had every night for 3 years, always with one eye on the exit, always half ready to leave a place that had taken everything and given nothing back. Neither of those versions happened. The jet climbed until it was a light among the first stars, and the 3 of them watched it go. And when it was gone, Aaron still had not left, and Sam had not looked once toward the door. For 3 years he had sat by the exit. That evening, for the first time, neither of them was looking for the way out.